I'm going to introduce a fantastic panel that we have today from folks who are leading thinkers in the mining and natural resources industry. I want to briefly ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it, talking about the future, talking about uncertainty, talking about what's coming and what's possible in the mining industry. So from left to right, if you'll begin, please.
Morning, George. Morning, everyone. Mike Wundenberg from Newmont. I lead our operational technology and innovation function. Been in mining probably over 20 years. Strong operational background, and 2013 led our, or launched our Full Potential program, which is our business improvement, along with asset management. Part of that was we conducted some digital assessments last year, and coming out of that we've established the technology and innovation function. So.
Rob.
Yeah, good morning, George. Good morning, everyone. Rob Medley, Managing Director for Advisian's Global Minerals and Metals practice. For those of you who are not familiar with Advisian, it's the advisory, consulting and front-end project development arm of the Worley Parsons Group. Been in project delivery, consulting, EPCM for about 20 years now. So delivering mining projects, consulting to mining projects, but cross-sector background as well. I've worked in energy, infrastructure and minerals and metals.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Afzal Jessa. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Vale. I run the digital transformation program. I've taken this position for about a year now, and had some very interesting conversations with George when I first started, trying to define what is the role of the Chief Digital Officer. So I'm now tasked with leading a $500 million transformation program across Vale over the next 3 to 5 years. Prior to that, ran IT innovation at Vale, but I've been with Vale now in mining for about 11 years. I'm not a mining guy. Started my career as a startup entrepreneur and worked in consulting for many years, so very excited to be here.
Good morning, George. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Dr. Lesley Warren. I'm the Managing Director and the Chief Principal Research Investigator at the University of Toronto, Lassonde Institute of Mining. I lead a multi-million-dollar research portfolio looking for new solutions and strategies for mining wastewater, tailings, and reclamation. As the newest director for the Lassonde Institute, we've been disrupting the University of Toronto and developing a refreshed and rebranded vision to be a global community catalyst for the industry that's looking for strategic solutions around sustainability through talent development, research, and thought leadership.
All right, so thank you very much. So I'll start with you, Lesley, with our first question. If you look 20 years into the future, in 2038, and I ask you what the future of mining looks like, I would ask, how is it going to be different than today? And bearing in mind that 20 years doesn't seem like a very long time, but the iPhone was only invented 11 years ago, and in 11 years, a whole heck of a lot has changed in that industry and the industries around it alone. So how will mining be different in just a minute, in 2038 than it is today?
In 30 seconds, as you said.
Well, 30
right.
Seconds.
So my thoughts on this are twofold. One is that, and there's a lot of discussion in the industry around disruption and around innovation. I think those conversations are necessary to find the path forward. That path has to be more adaptive, more resilient. It has to recognize and deal with the failures and the legacies of mining of the past. And I think it has to develop an inclusive culture, which will have to be top down. You want the brightest ideas, you need diversity of thought leadership, you need bright people driving that.
Afzal? I'm like the waiter that shows up just as you're taking a bite and asks you how the food is, right? So
I would say the industry looks fundamentally different than it does today, or at least it has the potential of looking fundamentally different than it does today. Obviously, automation is core. So with that, I think the opportunity to remove people from risk, we have a significant responsibility in that regard. I think we will have the opportunity to actually live up to that potential of really living up to the mantra of zero lives lost, zero lives changed, people operating remotely, inspections done remotely. I think AI becomes fundamental, and I see a future where artificial intelligence basically informs all of the decisions that we're taking in our industry.
Yeah, so I might just provide a slightly counterpoint to that. I don't think it will actually look as different as we may think. Your point there, George, around the iPhone, I mean, some of the ones that really rapid adoption of technology, they're at an individual consumer perspective, where the decision is one person makes the decision and the technology rapidly can permeate. If you look at organisations and industries and you look at the minerals and metal sector, there is a lot of inertia. There's companies there, there's short-termism, there's the shareholder value, there's a lot of other things that make adoption of technology more challenging, I would say, than the quick adoption you'll see there. I do see there will be fundamental shifts, and they will be driven by safety or a business case. So everything's got to have a business case value. You're going to take people out of harm's way, or you're going to reduce costs or increase value. I think some of that you'll see in the last wave of Industry 3.0 kind of mass production, kind of passed by the M&M sector. Things got bigger and everything, but kind of passed by. I think the next wave, 4.0 of mass customisation, I think you'll see some really good stuff there with vendors coming together, more collaboration, working on, you'll get some that will go for the lower ore, mass produced, some can go for the higher grades and different technologies. So,
Mike?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is to become more manufacturing-like in terms of productivity and efficiencies, particularly on highly repetitive tasks or high-risk tasks, and which is really, similar to what we've talked about up here is taking people out of harm's way. Both operators and maintainers, and I think so. That's one. I think the other thing is really around technology and innovation related to energy, water consumption, and really the environmental aspect of things. I think that's really where we're looking for a change.
All right, so let's talk about that for a second. I mean, some of you say that it'll be more similar than different. Some of you say it's going to be vastly different, but we've seen a couple of waves of innovation and mine of the future programs over the last couple of decades. And a lot of them have come and gone, and not much has changed at all. A lot of money, a lot of press, a lot of talk. And in fact, right now, there are companies that are absolutely transforming, merging, cutting innovation, cutting digital, despite all of their proclamations of the future. Why do you think, those of you that do think it will change, why do you think that in 20 years anything will be different at all? What's going to be different this time around than the last 2 times or 3 times that people tried? Mike?
Yeah, I think for us at Newmont, it's when we talk about technology innovation, it's really around value and viability, and really understanding where you think the opportunity is or the challenge is, and making sure that you're focused on the right things. So I think that's really important for us. We conducted 2 digital assessments last year, which really helped us line up in terms of some priority areas. And I think the risk in the technology space is you can become a mile wide and an inch deep.
Right.
And it's about connecting it to value.
Now, Afzal, you're tasked with major transformation of a massive company. Why do you think this time will be different?
I would echo Mike's comments that I think that the difference this time around is that we are laser focused on achieving business outcomes, and we don't talk specifically about business problems as much as the ultimate outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. I think that gives us a little bit more space for creatively trying to find ways to solve those problems. I think the other aspect which is starting to permeate our organizations in the industry as a whole, although there's still a lot to learn, is the idea of agile and how to apply agile concepts, fail fast, etc. And it's not just the buzzword I'm using, it's really that mindset of experimenting, taking risks, but also learning when to cut bait. I remember some of those I wasn't in the industry at the time, but some of those programs from the previous waves, you would see pilots that would run for 5 and 10 years, and people just, dumping millions upon millions of dollars without a clear understanding of what it was they were trying to achieve. They would lose sight of that, and without a significant enough focus on applying the learnings as they were getting them. So I think that's another fundamental difference, proving the results as we go.
Lesley, are you seeing any of this in the University of Toronto side or the academic side of it?
I think there are two points I would make. So one is that obviously at the university we're very much focused on talent development and talent that the industry requires now and going into the future. And obviously we're an academic institution. We are very much focused on diversity. A lot of our graduates are finding resistance to a broader mindset, new ideas, adaptability coming into this industry. So I think having a culture shift has to be permeated through the sort of the management and the leadership thought culture of industry to allow for these people in, and I think that will facilitate a lot of these ideas, which are not at all sort of scary or foreign to our graduates that are coming out. If you want people, young people coming into the industry, you don't just have to be welcoming, you have to actually retain them. You have to retain them with opportunities to apply that kind of thought leadership they're being exposed to.
So Rob, I'm going to direct the next question at you, and it sort of builds a little bit off of this. Mike talked about value and understanding where value is coming from. Afzal and Lesley talked about capabilities and changing the way things are done. So an argument has been made, right or wrong, that in a world in which everything is automated and everything is self-learning and self-correcting, right? That operations and operating performance isn't going to be the same competitive advantage it was in the past. So first of all, agree or disagree with this, but if that's the case, where do you think value is going to come from in the past? Because traditionally, mining companies often competed on their ability to have very efficient operating platforms. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned that ore bodies is going to be critical. You know, the ore bodies will always be a key source of competitive advantage. And then how well you operate. I mean, that is actually fundamentally what you do when you're in business, is you're still operating. So I think what will change is what we view as operations. I think as we move forward, the ability, and Mike mentioned it before, the social license aspect, the environmental aspect, and how you compete on those things in terms of developing projects is going to be far more important. So I think you will get sources of competitive advantage. No doubt, you know, humans have inherent biases as well, so AI is not going to take those biases out. So in the augmented learning and how you apply these things, and they're different in different regions. You've got to look at the context of Africa and the geopolitical things there versus Australia versus developing. They're all going to be different. So AI is not going to be a broad thing, and the technologies and the learning things, it's not going to be broad brush to say, all right, the operations are just going to do this themselves.
So you still think mining companies have to actually operate their mines?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would take a slightly different spin on that. You know, if you look at us today, I would say probably the majority of the companies in this room, I mean, we have technology parity right now. We have, largely, you may have some differences in terms of, you know, human capability. The ore bodies definitely are a source of competitive advantage, but ultimately, the biggest source of competitive advantage is the human potential and how we apply the human potential and the management systems that surround those and organize them. And I don't think that changes in the future. I think the way in which we organize ourselves, the way in which we creatively apply these technologies in different ways, the extent to which, I like what Scott said, the extent to which we can collaborate more with a diverse set of individuals, I think unlocks a set of value that will be the competitive differentiator going forward.
Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess a bit of all of that. I think that, but to me, it really comes down to your license to operate in terms of you know, a strong, proven reputation with communities and governments, and obviously, you know, being social and environmentally good partners. So I think that's going to be a key element.
So let's talk license to operate for a second then. So we're in an interesting time, interesting world, right? A lot of populism, a lot of pressure and fear from society around jobs, a lot of increasing sovereign nation power and increasing demands from communities. And in all of this, at the same time, the mining industry is looking to automate. It's looking to remove people from jobs underground. In fact, a lot of people have stated that a humanless mine, a factory mine, is in fact where things need to go. So in a world in which all of these things exist, in which a lot of communities are built up around mines, how is this actually going to happen? I mean, what are the things that mining companies need to bear in mind to see this through? And if it's not the feasibility of the technology or even the implementation of it, but the acceptance of it, how are we going to manage it? Will we even be allowed to try? So, Lesley, what do you think?
So, you know, and this really would come from the viewpoint we've been developing at Lassonde. This will only happen successfully in community. So for mines to start building and developing new mines, where communities are concerned about particularly the environment, water, what the closure strategies are, what are the jobs going to be, I think for mines to actually get that license to operate, it will have to be through a shared set of values that are derived in community. And I think this is an industry, in general, most of us can do a lot better job at listening to other people as opposed to talking at people. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
Absolutely agree. I think this idea of inclusion and engagement with the broader stakeholders community is going to be absolutely critical, whether it be the workforce of the future, et cetera. I mean, one of the things we're looking at, we operate, like many of us, in very remote regions. Communities are built. In fact, in many cases, we create them around the mine sites and the operations. And so how does this change our social license to operate, our responsibility? And one of the things we're doing there is starting to try and think through, can we engage the community in this digital transformation, so to speak? Can we equip them with new skills? Can we become a channel or a partner to effectively open up this new world and create opportunities for them beyond the traditional mining jobs that historically we've provided before? And so far, receptiveness to that kind of idea has actually been very, very positive. Again, focus on education, focus on training, and focus on creating almost a backbone for them to participate has been very, very positive.
Well, I think this is one where we're in broad agreement here. I think fundamentally getting that social license is going to be about leadership. Mm-hmm. It's going to be about telling a better story. I think it's not just the minerals and metals industry. It's globally, we've forgotten the ability to tell stories. It was really the way people used to pass information through and get buy-in was through storytelling. We've lost the ability to tell a good story. And so getting that buy-in through storytelling and mutual understanding is going to be absolutely key.
So, I mean, let me ask just a more specific version of that. I'm not 100% sure I agree, but that's okay. Might it not be smarter to just automate everything, teleremote it from Sweden, and just get out of these environments where, frankly, are kind of shifting, fractious, and difficult to work in? Or are you actually going to train people in the middle of remote areas to run teleremote equipment in other mines in other parts of the world? Are you going to build digital centers in the middle of the rainforest, as it were?
If I could share a story, I remember the first time I presented to the board the initial investment plan for the program. And one of the first objections that our CEO came up with, he said, Afzal, I think this is all great. We're talking about potentially reshaping the workforce, et cetera, but I see a massive risk of destroying value in this process. And today in our railways in the north of Carajás, as an example, Minas Gerais, we frequently have invasions because people are they need to better their lives, right? Quite simply. So the idea of not addressing that full on, I think is naive. I don't think we can get away with that. I don't think we can just isolate our operations from the rest of the world and say, well, we're going to operate them from wherever, and life will be candid.
Everybody agree? Any disagreements?
No, I think that's right. I think the reality is that you're part of that community and you need to be part of it. And I think that the whole digital innovation and digital path forward isn't really about eliminating roles. I mean, there's a lot of repurposing of roles. So I think it's a matter of making sure that all your stakeholders, everyone's clear in terms of what we are actually trying to achieve. So
I think too, I would add that I think there's often this sort of characteristic of looking at individual components of mining, and you have to look across the mining cycle. So you can automate all you want, but if that community doesn't have confidence that you will understand and have a robust plan for your waste and water treatment, you're not going to be able to operate there. So I think sort of this idea that this could be a component that could facilitate better solutions, more efficiency, has to be viewed in the whole picture of how are you going to do this mining activity, and how is the community going to benefit from it, and how are they going to be confident that when you go, their community isn't going to be suffering legacy issues for decades, if not hundreds of years.
So I'm going to switch topics a little bit to a different topic. One of my favorites for the last few years, the mining industry. Before it was open innovation, you had open innovation consortia, and everyone would put stickies on the wall and invite everybody. And the last couple of years, companies have been doing hackathons, and they've been doing little mini digital thingies where come and help us whatever, maker this and maker that. They've hired chief digital officers and so forth and so on. And I guess the question is, looking from the outside in, a lot of people wonder, well, is this innovation theater? Or is anything actually happening? So I will start with the gentleman with the title of chief digital officer and ask you, Afzal, is this theater so far?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to pull out my iPhone and ask Siri that question. You know, I think there's a risk that it could be perceived as that. I think there's a risk that it could end up becoming that. But fundamentally, I don't think so. Obviously, I'm biased in my answer. I mean, I think generally there's a recognition that in order for innovation to take hold in our industry, and to be quite frank, our industry has been innovative. Let's be honest. It's just been innovative in different forms. It's been a little bit slow to innovate. Perhaps we've been a little bit insular in our process to innovate. But the fact is we have innovated. I think there's a general recognition now that you know, there's risk to the way in which we operate, and there's a potential that others may disrupt the industry in ways that we may not necessarily foresee. I think there's also a recognition that in order to understand what the true potential of our operations are in our industry is, you know, this idea of diverse thinking and collaboration is absolutely critical. And so this innovation theater, for me, is much more about injecting new ideas from the outside into an industry that has been historically very insular. As I mentioned, you know, I'm not a mining guy, and I remember very early on I went into the operations, and even to this day, and we were talking about this as we were standing outside waiting for the session to start. You know, we really suffer with a not invented here syndrome, right? Each of our operations is unique. Right? We very rarely learn from one another. We defend why we can't apply those ideas, even from our own industry. And then it gets even worse when you talk about ideas that are applied outside the industry. So fundamentally, what we need to do, and what we're trying to do, is create a culture of openness, a culture of, again, openness to new ideas from the outside. And that's what the process is about, and I think that'll pay some dividends.
So Mike, you come from a very practical background. You're doing practical things right now, I think, for example, with Caterpillar and others as well. Yep. What's your view on the more theater versus implementation of practical stuff?
I think as I said earlier, I think that for us it's about value and viability. But you also need vision as well, right, in terms of what's out there in the future. It's not, you just can't. And so we look at sort of the current opportunities and, to Axel's point, laser focus on that and deliver those. And I think that that's what builds the credibility to expand and go further. So,
Rob, you sit in the middle, right? You've got an engineering background. You're part of Worley Parsons, yeah. But you also have to do some of the more strategic stuff. What are your thoughts? Is it all smoking?
I think it's a little of column A and a little of column B. I think you absolutely need, I mean, innovation in my perspective is actually driven from the centre or on the edges, you know, around edgecraft. So you don't have to go looking too far to find out the areas to innovate. Some of the stuff they're going with Silicon Valley and doing that, I think that's great. But I think we've neglected the core of the industry, the core of our own organisations, and there's a lot of innovation that can be driven there. So I think the foundational business case innovation and driving forward on that, absolutely. A lot of people talk about what it is. We're talking about the what today. Yep. Because Afzal's comment was really interesting. I thought somewhat enlightening today. What is a CDO? What's a Chief Digital Officer? There's a lot of stuff about what. You'll read management consulting papers saying what. There's not actually that many people doing the how. And I think that's where there's a lot of money getting spent, figuring out the what and paying management consultants to do a lot of the what, and it looks great. But we need to do some of the how, and so the stuff Mike's talking about is getting in and actually doing it, learning from it. You know, we're doing some stuff with a client now with a 3D intelligent model. We've brought in their operational folks right from the outset. So right at the outset there, we're designing with the end in mind to operate that plant. It's going to increase uptime, productivity. So you need some of that how. It's great to talk about the what. I think you need some of it both. And to connect it all is leadership. We need really strong leadership.
Yeah, I just want to jump on that. I totally agree. I think you need both. You need both. The way we're approaching it at Vale is actually, we do have a significant portfolio that's absolutely based on the fundamentals of a strong business case. Short, medium, long-term returns. But we've put aside a percentage of our investment, what we're calling innovation capital, to start to experiment more in these new techniques, the how, if you will. And many of the projects that we're implementing, we often go in and you talk to the operational teams, and they have a very clear idea of how to solve those problems, what technologies can be applied, what process changes. What we're trying to do in parallel is inject that with new ideas and almost do it in parallel, right? And the results that we deliver through the portfolio, I think, build the credibility. I think it builds the confidence for people to be able to dream bigger and be a little bit more innovative. So we are approaching it both ways.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, for us, I know we look at, three things really. I mean, one is where are we at currently today, in terms of the here and now, and that's what we talked about. We have what we call the critical few that we focus on. Right. And then we also have what's further out there, whether it be called future back, however you want to approach it, and sort of there's a balance there, right, between what you're working on today and where you see yourself in the longer term. So that's the second point. And the third point, though, I think is probably the most critical, is that whole change in communication and making sure that we can build awareness and support from the executive level right down to the front line. So everybody's bought into it and understands, there's a very good reason why we're doing things and it all makes sense.
Mike, just a question for you on that. In how you guys are executing, how are you able to, or are you pursuing trying to create a new mindset within the groups, or do you inherently have that in your organization?
Well, we've come off we still continue on, but we ran our Full Potential program for 5 years, really focused on performance and efficiencies, and so then we applied the digital assessments last year. So it was really what incremental value is that to the business. So that helped connect, particularly with operating sites who've got to deliver an operating budget safely. So that's really what has built the swell, I guess.
So I'm going to switch the subject again. You guys talked about potential disruption coming from outside the mining industry. You talked a little bit about making sure that the mining industry thinks about the future. I'm going to talk about asteroids and undersea and all sorts of crazy stuff. And just as an example, as everyone probably knows, I think it was last spring or the spring before, Apple came out and said they wanted all the minerals and all the metals that go into their phones to come from recycling one day. And one day means they haven't figured out exactly how to do that, but one day. Now let's say they figure out how to do that, and they figure out how to do it at scale, or we figure out how to mine an asteroid, or we figure out how to actually get metals efficiently from underwater. What does that mean from the mining industry? And more to the point, where do you think potential disruption might come from? Do you see it as a real threat in that direction? Lesley, let's start with you.
So threat's an interesting word, right? Because it suggests that you're static. And I think that I would suggest it reflects that the industry is going to have to be nimble. They're going to have to be able to adapt, and they're going to have some resilience, which means you need forward thinking. Whether you mine from asteroids or whether you recycle from phones, quite frankly, to get traction for mining of anything has to essentially take into account the big black boxes, the grand challenges the industry has that it isn't actually dealing with very effectively. So if you don't start dealing with water, you don't start dealing with social corporate responsibility and having that community buy-in, none of these plans for the future are going to have traction with communities. People don't like mining. I don't think that's a message that's a surprise to anybody in the room. The message has to change, the story has to change. We have to incorporate society into that. But the industry as well needs to really start thinking about opening up these black boxes and figuring out solutions.
So the source of the threat is less important than whether or not mining companies are able to deal with the real external things that are making it difficult to mine.
To me, for an industry to be resilient, you've got to deal with your failures from the past. That's how you learn. That's how you learn to innovate. And I think it gives you a much more solid foundation to go forward and get buy-in.
So does that mean that Vale is now dealing with all of the externalities, but also looking at how to mine from asteroids and recycle iPhones, or?
We're not. I wish I could. No, that would probably be a bit too far out there. I actually am not sure in the, let's say if we use the 20-year horizon, I'm not sure that I see a future where the industry as a whole is disrupted to that extent. I think processes within the industry could be disrupted. If you talk about recycling as an example, I've seen statistics where significant portion of China's metal demand will be satisfied through recycling, through their own recycling programs. So I probably don't need to wait for Apple to do it, though Apple will probably do it for the higher, the precious metals or the rarer type metals. But I tend to agree with Lesley. I think that the disruption itself, or the greater risks, are how we engage with the community, how we engage with governments. I think that has the potential of having a much more significant impact in the industry than any of the technologies that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of those as well. I think, fundamentally as mining companies, you have to understand your core business. And so are we going to get out and start doing asteroids and everything else? Probably not in the next 20 years. Again, looking at recycling, are we recycling companies? Probably not. Some of the ones that are more focused on logistics, they may be able to move into that kind of space. Vale is very heavily into logistics, and the recycling plays. Again, you don't have an ore base that's in a location. Recycling to get to scale to actually make it work. You need to collect a lot of stuff from a lot of places and almost franchises, and then becomes a logistics play with your supply chain. So companies that are looking at that could get into there. The third element, I think that it's kind of interesting to look at where disruption could come from. We talked of the iPhone before, but technology can go kind of two paths. It can get the incumbents into a stronger position, but historically it has opened up the field for smaller players. So can juniors who would maybe not be looking at developing a project, they just want to find the rocks, get a PEA or a PFS in place, flip the asset, does technology allow them to develop some of these things and say, well, actually, as to your point before, George, they don't actually have to operate as much now. So it's like, I actually am not really an operator. I can get these systems, I can work with AI and machine learning and some other technologies, and now that I've found a great rock, it's not that big, but it's going to be economic, 6 years mine life, Bob's your uncle, and off we go. So I think we might see some of that stuff there where the juniors, because of technology and advancements, can actually start to develop more of them than flipping them.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you just talk about asteroids and undersea and all the rest of it, I mean, it's
well, there's a lot of gold out there to recycle.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what they say. But I think there's there's a lot of buzz or noise, you can call it, and whilst it's exciting, I think it's also important that you filter your way through that in terms of what we really see as the potential disruptors coming. And I think on our side of things, we look at whether it be in processing or mining or asset management or environmental supply chain, whatever function we have, and you're hearing lots of these interesting things that are coming, but it's really just keeping a watching brief in terms of what is evolving and developing versus what's in the media.
Right, so. Wonderful. So I'm told we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask one simple question and ask you to bucket you into what shouldn't be a simple question, but ask you if there's 15 seconds each, if there's one innovation, technology advancement that you think has the potential to fundamentally change the industry, just one, what would it be and why? Mike, we'll start with you.
In situ leaching.
All right.
That would be it for me in terms of disruption and also capital. That would be the one.
Rob?
I might cheat a little bit there because it's not really a new invention, but basically open sourcing it. You saw when the internet took off, it was from open source. You look at this industry, it's all proprietary technologies, and I think that's holding us back.
And you think the secret is in somehow blending them all together so everyone can use everything?
Yeah, we need some data aggregation.
Okay.
Nanotech and 3D printing. Get rid of the need for metals entirely. Just was at a conference, MIT prof talking about how they're printing glass now. So.
Right. And finally, Lesley.
So I'm gonna punt a little bit here. I think it's human potential, right? Adaption will be much better if you have diversity of thought and diversity of ideas. And so I think opening up companies and sort of getting different people in with different ideas would be a really strong characteristic.
I think those are all excellent ideas, excellent answers, and I want to thank you very much for your time and for your candor this morning. Thank you very much, folks, for your time.